Breath. Go.
Good evening. My name is Marjorie Gans, and I'm a member of the board of the Writers' Room of Boston.
Yes.
I'm delighted that you could join us this evening for our March reading. And I'm going to have to confess that I am echoing. And so I will do this as best I can. We began our reading series, Readings from the Room, 1 year ago in March. For anyone new to us, the Writers' Room of Boston is a co-working space in downtown Boston for any and all writers, established and emerging, who want or need a quiet place to write. The room is open 24 hours a day. It provides desks and silence and the quiet companionship of other writers. The room is, We have been serving the writers of the greater Boston area since 1993. Do contact us if you're curious or have any questions about the room, because we would be delighted to have new members. And we have different levels of membership starting this year. We have a virtual membership, which entitles you to different things online and a writer's time to write, and at a slightly lesser cost than the freedom to use the room. So if you're interested, please contact our program director, Leslie Ostro, at info@writersroomofboston.org. In 2021, we launched this new reading series as a way to reach out to the writing community during the pandemic and share the wonderful writing from both established and emerging writers. Some of the readers call or have called the Writers' Room home, and some now are from different parts of the country, which is a benefit conferred on us by Crowdcast. Tonight, we have Julie Scolnick, a musician and author of a memoir, and Leah Henderson, a writer of fiction for young adults. Julie and Leah will read from their works, and then we'll open it to a larger discussion with some time for questions and answers at the end. As we go along, feel free to use the comments feature at the box at the bottom of the screen, and you can type in your questions there. This series is made possible by grants from the Mass Cultural Council and the Boston Cultural Council, and we also rely on friends. So if you enjoy this program, please consider making a contribution using the donate button at the bottom of your screen. Also, we will be recording this reading, and a replay will be available on Crowdcast. We begin the evening with Julie Scolnick. Julie is a writer and a concert flautist and artistic director of Mistral Music, a chamber music series she founded in 1997, where she's been giving opportunities for other artists and creating imaginative programming. A writer as well, Julie's memoir, Paris Blue, was published to wide praise in 2021 by Kohler Books. This love at first sight, moving tale of an ebullient young American and a reserved Frenchman will transport readers to the cafes, streets, and concert halls of Paris in the late 1970s. It spans 3 decades and evolves from a deep romance to sudden heartbreak, and finally into a lifelong quest for answers to release immutable grief. Ms. Scolnick is also a frequent guest on Boston's WCRB, formerly GBH, radio, and has made over 3 dozen radio appearances. She lives in Boston with her husband, physicist Michael Brower, and her 2 cats, Daphne and Chloe, and they have 2 adult children, Sophie and Sashka Scolnick Brower, also musicians. You can learn more about Julie and Paris Blue at www.juliescolnick.com. Julie. Okay, I see Mark on the screen, who is our technical wizard.
Well, Mark is not the technical wizard quite, but can we do Leah first, please? Because we are having trouble getting Julie on the screen.
We'd have to ask Leah if we can do Leah first.
Let's do Leah first, okay?
Okay, but she needs to consent to that. And Leah, are you okay with that?
Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
So I am okay to go first if everyone is gracious and kind and patient with me, because at the last second I am switching what I am reading.
Okay, that's fine. Just
Okay,
go ahead.
and I need to introduce you so people know who you are. So I have given Julie's introduction. Let me give Leah's, because that's only fair. So we're switching. As you can tell, we're having a little bit of tech stuff. And our next reader is now Leah Henderson. Leah is the author of middle grade novels The Magic in Changing Your Stars, a CCBWI Golden Kite Award finalist, and One Shadow on the Wall, a Children's Africana Book Award notable, and a Bank Street Best Book. Her picture books include Daddy Speaks Love, Together We March, A Day for Remembering, and the forthcoming Your Voice, Your Vote. Her writing is also included in a few anthologies. Leah holds an MFA in writing and is on the faculty at the Naslin Mann Graduate School of Writing at the Spalding University MFA program in Louisville, Kentucky. She was born in Richmond, Virginia, and grew up in Andover, Massachusetts, and now lives in Washington, D.C. You can find her on Twitter at Leah's Mark, or at her website, leahhendersonbooks.com. And she, as she said, for a variety of reasons, had to switch at the last minute. So, Leah, you have all our kindness and generosity and good heart. Go for it.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with you all this evening. So instead of reading what I plan to read, I'm going to read from my debut novel, One Shadow on the Wall.
You just have to get me out of the.
Okay, hold on just a sec. Mark, we're still okay. And then sorry. There we go.
All right. So I'm going to
All
and hopefully this and that the reverberation doesn't let's see. Is anyone else?
Let me try. Does anyone hear me right now?
Sorry, everyone. Okay, so I'm gonna get started, and hopefully this will be all right. So, like I said, I'm going to be reading from of my debut novel, One Shadow on the Wall.
Yeah.
Open your eyes. The word sailed through Moore as if his father had leaned in close, with his lips only inches from his ear, like his mother had done 2 nights before. The call to prayer hummed in the distance. Sleep weighed heavy on Moore's eyelids, and his mind was a web of dreams. It had been a little over 2 days since his father's voice had first joined him, and he no longer found it strange that his ba's words reached him at any time of day. And in that moment, he even stopped questioning why his ba and ya did not come together. He was just grateful that they came at all. Wake, my son, his father's voice echoed. Sleep when your heart no longer beats like the saber drum. Do not lie still expecting to be handed what you need. You are not a fish flapping in the sun, sucking air, hoping to be thrown back to sea. Moore twisted on his mat and his eyes slowly opened. He rolled to his side. He had remained there for almost 2 days, crying and missing his ba, and he wanted to stay there undisturbed at least 20 days more. No one had been able to move him so far, not even Amina. She had nudged him in the back with a broom, saying, "Lying like this is not good for you. And it's not good for Tima to see. Get up." But her words fell on Moore's closed ears. But his ba was different. He demanded that Moore listen. Your tears are understood, but your wallowing is not. Rise, his father urged. Rise. Pulling himself to his knees, he obeyed, then dragged the water bucket and bowl out and began to bathe. When he was finished, he left the house, looking back only to think of his parents. Even under the waking sun and icy frost, as icy frost bit more, a charred, twisted bumper, a sprinkling of shattered glass, and a jagged piece from the truck that had kissed his breaths hunkered before him, not far in the distance. Straggly chicken feathers fluttered, trapped by the sand. Lift your gaze and walk, my son. Settle your sights on the horizon, not this. Moore's body shook. Frantic, he took off in a sprint, though his legs and feet could not move fast enough for him. He pumped his arms and mashed his sandals against the dirt, running until pain pierced his sides, knocking out his breath. He nearly tumbled over when he stopped. Except for his ragged breaths, all was silent. Why had he gone this way? There were so many other roads he could have taken. It is not important the reason why, only that you had the strength to get through. Moore continued walking, not convinced it had been any great strength that had helped him. It had been fear. After a few more bends in the road and many deep, calming breaths, he was away from his father's accident and away from Mokhtar. Heading for the beach, he pulled out his mother's turquoise and ruby-colored pouch with its painted, twirling line of gold, hoping to settle himself, hoping to hear even his father's disapproval at bringing it. Anything would be better than his heartbeat thudding in his ears. But his father said nothing as he stared down at the pouch. Each day of her life, his Ya had poured the contents of it into her hand and remembered, thanking Allah for the treasure of her family. When she was unsettled, she had pressed it close to her heart, and at that moment, it brought more comfort. His Ya had always said the nafa that held her heart because it contained a curl of Amina's baby hair, his chipped baby tooth, and the button Fatima had always tried to swallow, and a tiny seashell that had rested between his parents' feet on their wedding day. Moore had thought there was no better place to secure his family's only francs. The money clinked inside the shifting cloth, and he found it strangely reassuring in his hand. Glancing around, he shoved the pouch deep inside his pocket. When it fell, he hardly felt it against his leg. The money inside wasn't much, but for 6-year-olds like his sister Fatima, might think it was riches, while older kids would consider it a lucky find. But a man would have quickly come, and it would have quickly come and go. And at 11, Moore could no longer be a boy, as his father's voice had reminded him. He needed to become a man. If I tell myself I am a man, am I? He knew he appeared no different from the boy he had been days before, no taller, stronger, or wiser. But within 2 days, everything had changed. He kept walking, concentrating on his next steps, till the road curved at a short, crumbling mud wall. He heard a noise. 2 boys chasing a smaller boy who was gobbled up in an oversized t-shirt. The bigger of the 2 wore a stained baseball jersey and fraying shorts. Trip him, he said. Now be still. Both boys pressed their knees into the little boy's back. Moore backed away. You know what you're here for, the boy with the jersey warned. The trap boy coughed up dirt. Moore could hardly make out his face. It was a sheet of speckled sand. Hold him down, demanded another boy, striding up the beach. His skin shone like a crow's wing against the tangerine baseball cap he wore, backward on his head. A swathi dangled in the corner of his mouth. The chew stick bobbed up and down between his lips as he spoke. I'm going to teach you, he said. He pushed at his shirt sleeves, already above his elbows, and crouched down. Who told you to go spying through our doorway and touching our wall? I didn't. You saying I'm lying? The boy's face scrunched into a scowl. You hear that? He's calling me a fincut. No, the little boy gasped for air. When he parted his lips, he took in a mouthful of sand. I didn't say that. Then what did you say? Head in the sand, the little boy couldn't answer. Instead, he wiggled and kicked. Sand flew everywhere. The boy with the orange cap sprung up and dusted off his jeans. His eyes darted around, at first paying no attention to Moore at the beach wall. Then they traveled the length of Moore's body, and he snarled, baring teeth. Do you want some of this too? The boy spit. Moore backed away even more, meeting the crumbling wall again. Then let your eyes find somewhere else to be, he warned Moore. He reached down into the sand and pulled up a plump-sized rock. Turning back to the struggling boy, he said, "This will teach you to never let your eyes fall on the Donka boy's door." Moore closed his own eyes, but the sound of the rock hitting its target made him leap back, almost tripping out of his sandals. The young boy's screams stabbed the air. Afraid to look, Moore squeezed his eyelids together tighter, so the light coiled when he opened them again. The trapped boy's hand lay limp in the sand. The oldest boy raised the rock again. Moore's jaw moved. He yelled for them to stop. Or did he? No sound left his lips. His words were as trapped as the trembling boy. Moore watched in disbelief as the oldest boy let the rock fall again, crashing it inches away from the little boy's injured hand. "You will not be breathing near our door again, will you? Or even sneeze on our path." He swung the rock back and forth in front of the little boy's eyes. Sand clung to the little boy's face. Tear lines ran down his cheeks. It startled Moore, and Moore dropped his head. A part of him wanted to help the boy, but everything in him told him he should run. "Have your legs been hobbled like a mule's and your mind as well?" his father's voice rattled. Moore's hand shot up. "You are not an ostrich that can camouflage its head by lying on sand. You are its white tail feathers. You have been seen, and you must act." His father's words sparked something inside him. Blood rushed through his toes and fingertips. His eyes took in the beach around him, but unlike the boy with the rock, Moore could find nothing to throw. Then he saw it. On the other side of the crumbling wall, a massive baobab tree with a thick hide. Pods dangled from its branches. Moore's eyes swung between the tree, the boy, and the ground. "Ack! This boy peed on me!" In the commotion of the kids running and laughing, Moore grabbed up one of the rocks. "Hold him still," Papis demanded again. The rock was over his head, and he was about to throw it at the boy again. The captured boy bucked and twisted, his eyes locked on the rock aimed at his head. "Make him stop," Papis said, his friend with his eyes, "or next blow will be for you." Moore raced over to the wall. He grabbed up the rock and he ran forward. When Papis was about to let the rock strike the little boy's head, Moore let the pod sail. But instead of sailing through the air, knocking Papis over, it whipped across the open space and crashed inches away from Papis's feet. It landed like a glop of millet porridge, only a tiny shower of sand flung up when it hit the beach. It might not have struck where Moore wanted, but it had an effect. Everyone stopped, and Moore was immediately aware that he had gained all the attention. Unfortunately, hadn't thought past making them stop. The little boy was quiet, withering as well. His mouth formed a perfect circle, but he was also the first to react. In that split second of disbelief, he shoved against the other boy's loosened grip and shot towards Moore. For a second, time slowed. They stared at each other. Moore saw panic on the boy's face as he passed. In a flash, the boy was over the wall and gone. Moore's stomach plummeted to his knees. He knew the boy's panic was for him. He was a tree standing in the plains. He was exposed, and he was now the target. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah. That was wonderful. Yeah, it was wonderful, and I could visualize it all as you were reading. But we will turn now to Julie Scolnick, who is, as I said, a musician and a writer and has written a wonderful memoir, Love in Paris, Young Love in Paris. She will read from that memoir.
Okay, can you hear me? Because I did not know what happened. I was just dropped, and suddenly when I came back on, it had begun. Anyway, I hope this is all right. I have no idea. Marjorie, did you give any background at the beginning about this book, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I gave full introduction and described that it was a memoir of Paris love. So I read the introduction. And
Okay.
already heard me read.
Okay, all right. Well, hello everyone. Nice to be here in spite of all the technical difficulties. I've selected just a couple of moments first that I think demonstrate this concept of love at first sight. I was 20 years old. I had just arrived in Paris and I joined a chorus. And I will just dive right in. On Thursday night, I returned to the chorus. I was enjoying the music when I was startled by a face on the other side of the semicircle. It was as if a movie camera, panning casually across a sea of faces, stopped and focused on just one. A young, striking man, around 30 years old, sitting at the end of the second row of basses. And the camera wouldn't move. It was a sensitive face, radiating quiet intelligence. My fascination was less about his looks, however, than about his solemn demeanor, which stood out radically from the bellowing men surrounding him. I couldn't look away. At the end of the rehearsal, he disengaged himself quickly and was out the door before most people had put on their coats. Then, about 1 month later, the first concert happens. And I'm just going to dive right in here. And when the music began, I was transported. Seated on risers just behind the Orchestra of Paris, we were able to watch Daniel Barenboim's communicative gestures and facial expressions as he conducted. This was thrilling for me, as Barenboim was a legend and I had revered him for years. I sang easily and let the music fill my chest. Unfortunately, I lost sight of my crush, as a massive boys' choir was seated between the men and the women of the chorus. When the concert was over, tremendous applause brought the soloists and Barenboim back on stage for curtain calls. It surprised me that the chorus members left the stage just as chaotically as members of the orchestra. Everyone was squeezing through the crowded hallways, some members lining up in stairwells, others streaming into elevators to return to the underground levels to grab their coats. Suddenly, my handsome bass was brushing right past me. His face was only inches from mine, but he didn't see me, intent as he was on making his way through the crowd. It was the first time I had ever seen him up close, and the effect was no less potent than if I had just imbibed a mythical love potion. I followed the stranger with my eyes through the crowds and watched his tall figure head for the staircase to leave, so I hurried to the exit too. By the time I started climbing the stairs, he had just made the turn at the landing in the opposite direction. As I looked up, he looked down, and our eyes met. He sighed with an exasperated exhale, as if to complain about the many stairs, and I smiled. I was hoping that he too would exit at level -1 to take the metro home, but when I opened the stage door to the concourse, he was gone. My high spirits from the concert only marginally dampened. I headed toward the metro in my tweed cape, wrapping my white alpaca scarf loosely around my neck 3 times and tucking the ends into the collar without freeing my hair. After the 20-minute metro ride, I sauntered home more slowly than usual. I let myself into the apartment and with my unwieldy iron key, walked silently down the hallway to my room and stood in front of the antique mirror over the mantel without removing my coat. What did I look like to that stranger on the stairs? My cheeks were rosy and my eyes glassy from the cold walk home. For once, I didn't turn on the radio. It was too much of a distraction. Instead, I washed up and undressed slowly, crawled in between the sheets of my low, narrow bed, and went to sleep with the image of his face in my dreams. It was inside me somehow, like a phrase of music so beautiful I knew I would need to hear it again, or a painting that stayed with me without my knowing why. I'm just going to skip now to the moment that we're singing the next concert. At this point, he had begun to drive me home for rehearsals, and we were in that kind of delicious phase of sharing a little bit of shy information about each other. When I walked on stage, Luke was already seated at the edge of the basses with an empty chair next to him in the soprano section. He invited me with his eyes to take that seat so that we could sing the concert side by side. Although we could have done this any time during the rehearsals, neither one had dared to suggest it. I sat down beside him under the bright stage lights and could feel his right shoulder and thigh pressing against my left side. It was shockingly intimate. Soon the rest of the chorus members were filling in seats around us, and the remaining orchestra members were sitting down and beginning to warm up. It wasn't long before the hall grew quiet in the expectant moment before the orchestra tuned and Barenboim entered to great applause. There was no way to measure the magnitude of my happiness at that moment. I tried to imagine something that might make me feel this rapturous, but nothing came close. The proximity of Luke's body breathing next to mine, our bodies touching in the stillness of the concert hall, with neither the need nor the possibility to speak. The excruciating pleasure of knowing that we were feeling the same thing for the next 2 hours as we listened to music that we loved. My sensibilities were set free. My heartbeat accelerated or slowed each time a phrase grew in emotional intensity or calmed to a cadence. At the most beautiful moments, I held my breath. The music stirred in me such deep sentiment, almost too personal, too poignant, to be listening to next to him, as if everything inside me was exposed and there for him to see. Our hands rested at our sides, our scores open in our laps, ready to use when it was time to stand and sing. At one point, my left pinky inadvertently grazed Luke's right hand. It was like touching a power line. And I'd like to skip to a moment where, still at the early stage of this courtship, after he started dropping me off at home and figured out which window of mine, one day I came home and found a note shoved into the shutters. Now that he had come to my windows once unexpectedly, he took another chance later that week. Early Thursday evening, I returned home to find a note scribbled with dull blue pencil on a piece of paper wedged into my shutters. Quote, Thursday, 7 o'clock. Julie, it's raining and it's cold. I am cold. I've been waiting for you for over an hour, sitting in my car. I cannot seem to get myself to leave, as if paralyzed and frozen. But what am I doing here on Rue Brown-Séquard, if not to stare into the distance, hoping to catch a glimpse of you turning the corner in the dusk? Everything seems absurd. To wait in this car in this dreary weather on this sad little street, so that you might come smile at me for just a moment, and then leave to go home. Call me tomorrow morning. Tonight I will just think about you. Good night, Julie. Where was I, wandering around Paris somewhere, not knowing that anyone needed me or was looking for me? Nobody had ever looked for me or waited for me before in Paris. No one ever had noticed if I didn't return home before dark, or if I were wandering the other side of the Seine, lost for hours at a time. I held the note in my hands and I cried. So then I'm going to jump maybe 18 months after this romance was over, to demonstrate the extreme heartache. I couldn't get over how the world around me looked the same when everything inside me had changed. In the middle of the night, as I lay on my back, tears ran silently down my temples. It was a different sort of pain from when I was pining for him. No, I hated him with every ounce of my being. I was still in shock from his behavior, and for the moment that's all I felt, as if trying to emerge intact from a gruesome accident. But as I flew back to Boston, where I was to begin a new life, I couldn't stop thinking about how hopeful I had been. The summer had transformed me. There was a gnawing whisper in me that I would never feel the same way again. Wordsworth said it best in Tintern Abbey. Quote, I cannot paint what then I was. That time is past, and all its aching joys now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. Unquote. Was nothing that he wrote me true, or was love something so fragile that it could turn to dust just like that in the course of a few days? Phrases from all his letters I knew by heart played incessantly in my ears like a tune I couldn't get out of my head. Now, this is the final section I want to read for you. This is years later, 15 years later. I'm married. I have 2 children, and Luke calls me. He's in Boston and would like to meet. When I hung up, I retrieved his box of old letters from the top shelf of my closet. That box had migrated from closet to closet in 5 different homes since 1978, and yet there they remained, eerily untouched. I reread some of them for the first time in nearly 25 years. The memories of both love and anguish were as real as if our story had happened yesterday, as if I had compartmentalized the pain and preserved it in a deep alcove of my being. I sat on the floor, poring over them one at a time, surprised that I still remembered the musical flow of each one so well. There were tears, but I didn't miss Luke. I missed myself at 20 when there was nothing in the world I was more certain that I wanted. When my concert was over, I got into my car and headed toward the Boston Harbor Hotel, where new blocks of scaffolding and construction forced me onto streets I didn't recognize. A major snowstorm had been predicted for that evening. "What am I doing?" I whispered several times under my breath. It felt wrong, that it was late, that I was going out of my way to see him, and that if I hurried home, I might kiss my family goodnight before they went to sleep. I had long since worked my way back to wholeness and sanity since recovering from this painful love affair. I had landed intact and thankfully in a rich and fulfilled life with a man I adored. There were evenings when I stood in my kitchen with flour-caked hands trying to perfect my tarte tatin, a fire burning in the living room, the scent of fall leaves outside. My kids would be playing a piece together in the adjacent music room and asking me to join them. Quote, "Mom, come play hide and trio with us," they'd say, and my heart would take flight. So why was I here? When you fall in love at 20, I wondered as I drove around lost in the narrow streets of Boston's North End. Does the heart form around the other person, like an old tree slowly absorbs a sign hung on it when it was a sapling? And then when it's gone, do you forever feel the lack of it, feel its imprint, where it once rested?
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Julie. I think that's something that a lot of us can relate to, especially if we're older, going back further. So I know that we are running over, and I know that tech problems ate up a bunch of our time, and I appreciate everybody's patience. So there are a few questions, and I'm going to go ahead with the questions. If you need to go, you need to go, but if you're all right staying a few extra minutes, that would be lovely too. So the first question is for Julie. The first question is for Julie. How do you interpret this young new love at first sight from who you are now?
Do you mean how has my perspective changed? Is that what I understand from this question? Um, all I can say is that the reason I talk about this love at first sight moment is that a lot of people say it doesn't exist. And I'm here to insist that it's a thing, it's a real thing, because it was such a physical sensation. And as I said, it was like being tapped by a magic wand. I don't believe that you can possibly have that more than once in your life. Now that's a discussion for another time, perhaps. Um, and if you've read my book, or if you do read my book, and I hope you do, I think you see that the important things in life or the important love connections in life are not based on something like love at first sight. They're based on much different things, and the connections that we think are so important. In my case, it was all about music and poetry in Paris, and those are the things that did not uh, lead me to happiness in the end. And the man that I ultimately married, with whom I've been married for 33 years now, did not share music or poetry in that way with me. And yet he's the man, he's the real true love of my life. It's just, to me, kind of fascinating phenomenon that I wanted to share with people. I hope I answered that a little bit.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And
And
I had
there's a question for Leah. Leah, you've done a lot of writing, and I've known you for many years. And I'm really interested in all the things that you have written. What led you to gravitate to young adult?
Let's see. So for me, first, I just want to say again, thank you so much for your patience. I actually have not read from that book since 2017, so I was a little bit mortified. I'm someone who is curious about so many different things. And I write both fiction and nonfiction. I write for the youngest, and then I write for older readers as well. When we first met, I actually was writing for adults. So I'm kind of all over the place with the way that I think and the way that I move through stories and the things that make me curious. And the reason I started writing for children actually is when I was in graduate school, a professor overheard me talking about something. I don't know what I was running my mouth about. And they were like, have you ever thought about writing for children? And I was like, I'll try anything once, I'll give it a try. And I absolutely fell in love. And I feel like it is such an honor and a privilege. And it is so hard to write for kids because they will call you on any and everything. And so, but it's a wonderful challenge. So that's kind of how I got into it. And my 6th book just came out and I have 6 others on the way, and I'm in love with it. I'm just having a good old time.
That's wonderful. Thank you, because I've been curious about that, and listening to your reading, it's clear that you could really get into it in a way that I find hard to imagine. So thank you. It's almost 20 of 6. So I'm gonna thank everybody, and thank you everybody for your patience, readers, tech people, listeners, everybody. And hopefully we will get all this cleaned up. But I have to say, this is not the first online session I've been to that has been a little bit of chaos, so I don't feel quite so bad. Yes, Julie. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, because I'm so disoriented by what happened, so I didn't hear what you said or anything. I got knocked off somehow and didn't hear your introduction. But I would just like to tell anyone listening that I would love to continue any conversation. If you wanted to email me directly, I'd be so thrilled to hear from you. And even though I know that Marjorie can put it in the chat, I'm just going to tell you what my email is right now. It's the 2 first parts of Julie Scolnick. It's Jule Scol, JULSCOL @me.com. So if there's another question that occurs to you later on, please just toss me an email.
And I will free.
Oh,
But be super cool. Thank you for having me. And also, if you had questions for me, especially about Kidlit, just anything in the children's book space. And like Marjorie said, I teach now at our graduate school. And so any craft related questions, but you could reach me at my website at leahhendersonbooks.com if you have any questions for me. And thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Everybody's patience. Okay, good night, folks. Good night, listeners. I hope to see you all again.